Welcome to Timing is Everything. My name is Mary Crowe, Education Specialist at Care Dimensions. Today, we're here with our guest, Reverend Rona Tyndall, and we're going to talk about, she is the Senior Chaplain actually at Care Dimensions, and we're going to talk about spiritual care in hospice. Welcome, Rona.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So a little bit about myself. I was educated at Andover Newton Theological School. That's where I got my master's degree in divinity, and ordained in the United Church of Christ, and finished up a career in parish ministry. I was a preacher before coming here about 8.5 years ago to do three things. The agency, of course, was much smaller then. I think we had 6 or 7 chaplains. So I was their clinical supervisor, as I am now, though now we have 17.
Wow.
And worked with pediatrics in our pediatric palliative care program, and Chaplain House was smaller at that time. Yeah. So I was the chaplain over there.
Wow, that's great.
It's been great.
So
Great.
tell us about, what is a hospice chaplain?
A hospice chaplain is, there are a lot of ways to describe what we do. Our chaplains at Care Dimensions in particular, but this is not always true, happen to be clinically trained. They all have master's degrees in their fields, every one of them. And about half of them have doctorates in their field too. And what they do is they may or may not have come from the parish or the pulpit ministry, but they've been clinically trained to tend to people in a spiritual and emotional way that helps people find meaning and closure at the end of life, helps people to identify what has been important about them, what they've left as a contribution to the world, what they have unfinished that they grieve and maybe need to work on some reconciliation or find a way to forgive that and let it go. So we do a lot of life review with people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we do prayer and meditation. Sometimes we just listen.
Yeah, you know, and you say just listen, but you know as well as I mean, it's we can't even minimize the importance of listening, can we?
We can't, and people don't get listened to. It's a fact of life. Like, have you ever, I give this example sometimes in orientation. Have you ever been, stopped at a stoplight and somebody hits you from behind?
Yes.
So, you're journeying through life, and all of a sudden you get hit from behind with this, hospice diagnosis. You don't want anybody to send in AAA. You just want somebody to talk to for a little while. You just need to process it out loud. Yeah. This is how it impacted me. This is what I feel like now. This is how I plan to come to resolution. Talking and listening are really important. Yeah. And one of the ways that we know what we know is by giving voice to it, whether that's through speaking or writing or singing or journaling or acting things out, but to find a way to articulate in some way what we know of our experience helps us to know ourselves better.
Yeah, you talked about, and I'm going to ask you to tell us more certainly about what the chaplains do in hospice work, but I just want to go to something that you just said too, because you brought about reminiscing and life review and about giving voice. It's so critical in terms of that, that we take pride in what we do and what we've left our mark on this earth, right? And our contributions and such. But you're bringing up such important points, because when you're talking about listening and all of that, these things are so critical. So, I'm sure you'll tie that in, but so tell us more about the hospice chaplain work that they do, the various things, because when people think of hospice chaplains, I think they're just thinking again that you're tending to the religious piece. But so go ahead and tell us.
We do way more than that.
Yes, I know you do.
We do things, we do stuff, like we can do memorial and funeral services. Some of us can do Reiki with people. All of us certainly can teach various kinds of spiritual disciplines, prayer, meditation, journaling, that kind of stuff. So there are things that we can do. Mm-hmm. But more than any other hospice discipline, the biggest thing that we can bring is just being. Mm-hmm. Just being present. And we have this incredibly brilliant chaplain named Sharon Dunbar-Link, who's she's been at Care Dimensions far longer than I, and she's just a brilliant woman. And so once in a while she'll just, spout out some kind of nugget worth keeping. And she said one day, sometimes the thing that enables somebody to get from here to here is just knowing that they're not here alone. Mm-hmm. So that's really the biggest part of what the chaplains do. We had this wonderful chaplain who has since passed, God rest him, Charles, And Charles used to make a practice of, no matter whether somebody was comatose or so crippled by dementia that they appeared to not be responsive, he always spent 20 minutes with them, at least 20 minutes per visit, because there's something about being that authenticates our humanity and our importance in the world, and we never stop being important.
Yeah.
So that's really the biggest thing that we do,
Yeah.
is to abide with people.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And there's so little time. And really, and again, I think sometimes, again, people don't have that opportunity. And certainly, you know, you're talking about reminiscing and life review, and certainly we're talking about advanced illness at end of life, but reminiscing and life review is critical at all ages.
It is.
And not even when we're ill,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, you know, it's so interesting to see, again, so much of who we are today has to do with where we've come from.
Absolutely.
You know, and so is that also a part of the work that you're doing?
So here's what people talk about when they're dying. And hang on to this, because this is a little nugget.
Okay.
What people talk about in one form or another, almost exclusively when they're dying, is love. So they might talk about the love of their family and friends. They might talk about their love of place and community and culture. They might talk about a love of humanity that made them do what they did for work, you know, teachers, police officers, nurses, soldiers, their love for humanity. They might talk about the loves that really broke them, or the ways that they broke people in a regretful way, but it all boils down to love, because that's what people are made for. So helping people find that story and tell that story, what was the point of me? It's almost over. So how well did I love? Because that's the measure of a person's life, right?
Right, yeah, right.
We're made for two things. We're made to love each other, we're made to help each other. So at the end of life, to be able to look back and say, you know, I'm only 6 years old, or I'm 85 years old, and this is the way that I chose to live, this calling to love.
Yeah, that's a nice point. You know, when we talk about hospice care, we talk so much, it's really, you know, because again, when people think of pain, they think of the physical pain, but really it's about spirit, mind, and body. So again, how critical are chaplains to that interdisciplinary team? So can you talk more about that?
I'll give you a little example.
Please.
Of my favorite patient who's been gone for a few years. He was a young man, he was 52. And he had been addicted to drugs and alcohol for most of his life, you know, certainly since teenagehood, and lived with his folks after having been released from prison. He was a wonderful man. And he had a pretty highly developed theology of grace for other people. And he was a very, very spiritual man, very religious man. But at the end of his life, he was in just unmitigated pain. And you know yourself that at Care Dimensions, we know how to deal with people who have a history of drug and alcohol addiction, and to be able to medicate them effectively. Everybody was at a loss. But it turned out for this particular man, he had a life that was so full of self-regret that others had forgiven him for, but he had not forgiven himself for, that it was tied up in his spirituality, that he inside of himself had some need for redemptive suffering, which has a tremendous impact on the plan of care.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. You know, and again, when we talk about it, so a skilled nurse can certainly effectively, and we have such skilled hospice nurses, and they can effectively manage the physical pain.
Yeah.
But that there's the suffering is what can go undetected sometimes, and until we listen.
Existential suffering.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Yeah. And until we listen, suffering can continue to go undetected.
Sure.
And I think, again, that's what strikes me most, too, about, again, that component in terms of, as you said, to abide by, to tend to. So other things, though, that you find that the chaplains do that are so important to that, again, those at end of life or with advanced illness?
The chaplains are really very creative about finding ways to reach people who don't want to talk, or who can't talk, or who can't articulate, you know, whether they have dementia or whether they have ALS or some other thing that physically prevents them from being able to articulate easily. Singing is a big one that many of our chaplains use. I think probably maybe a third to a half of the chaplains sing to their patients, which is an incredible way to sort of access a whole nother part of communication.
Yeah.
And it's another way to pray. It's a very spiritual thing.
Oh,
So that's a big one.
Yeah. How about any other things that you can think about in terms of, again,
Keeping silence is a big one.
Yeah.
It's not something that a lot of people are comfortable offering. You know, people have a hard time with these long pauses in between, but
Yes.
Chaplains love pauses.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're so profound.
It's a lot of work gets done in those
Yeah,
silences. You
yeah,
know, there's a lot
yeah.
of discovery that goes
Well,
on there.
I think that's interesting because, again, with healthcare workers, again, we shift into action mode. We want to fix things a
Sure,
lot of
sure.
times. And again, to be able to be comfortable with others' discomfort, to be able to sit, and as you say, I mean, that is really a skill. And again, it's so hard for people to understand that because, we think we have to respond, we think we have to fix, but we can't always do that.
Well, and if you think about, the reason for an interdisciplinary team, the reason the hospice is such a beautiful healthcare model is because of the mind-body-spirit connection. Because the last thing on earth you want is a nurse who's going to be comfortable with your existential suffering, right? You want medicine. But on the same token, neither do you want to have a chaplain who's going to say, let me fix all these things for you.
Right.
You know? It's like back to the being rear-ended by a car. Your first inclination isn't to have somebody else call AAA for you. It's to have them listen to the story.
Yep.
So they're just very different roles, and the social workers really do a combination of that. They do the psychosocial support piece, and they do a tremendous amount of work on referrals and resourcing and that kind of thing. So there's this whole spectrum of care
Yeah.
that's really, imagine if everybody had that from the moment that they started to receive health care.
Absolutely.
Be beautiful.
Oh, absolutely, it would be. And I think, again, the hospice team understands how, again, each piece works so well together. And it's truly interlocking, interdisciplinary, where roles overlap.
Yeah,
So
we need each other.
we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back
All right.
and spend some more time
Good.
together. Thank you.
Care Dimensions, formerly Hospice of the North Shore in Greater Boston, is different in that we do more than just hospice.
It's just incredible, the services they provide when people need it the most.
So being able to offer more individualized care helps people feel more cared for.
Because it's about the patient's quality of life.
I don't think there's any place else in the Boston area like Care Dimensions.
At Care Dimensions, we'll take care of your family like you're a part of ours. Visit us at caredimensions.org.
Welcome back to Timing is Everything, show of Care Dimensions, formerly Hospice of the North Shore in Greater Boston. We're back here with our guest, Reverend Rona Tyndall, who's the senior chaplain at Care Dimensions. Rona, I've loved talking with you, the first
you.
part, and again, let's talk some more about too, because I wanted to ask you about, how are people, individuals with advanced illness at our end of life, how are they spiritually impacted? You talked a little bit about that in the first section, but can you talk more about that?
This is true across the age spectrum. This is as true for our pediatric patients as it is for our very elderly patients and everybody in between. A lot of people struggle with fear. And one of the questions that comes up often is, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of dying? Because certainly we can help you to have a comfortable death. That's what we do. Or are you afraid of being dead? And if what you're afraid of is being dead, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid about your soul's well-being? Are you afraid about unfinished projects? Are you afraid about your children and your family and things that you haven't been able to complete or see through to the end? So that's one big thing. Other people find that they rest deeply in their faith and look forward to it. I had a little girl who was 12 a number of years ago, and she asked her mom to call me and come over and talk about what heaven's like. So I went over, and she had all these birds that used to fly around the house. The kid was a hoot, and she was very engaging. And I said, I understand you want to talk to me. You had some concerns, and she said, yeah, I'm worried about when I die. What's heaven like? And I said, well, I don't know because I've never been. What do you think heaven's like? And she said, well, she thought there was a Cold Stone Creamery on every corner, and you could have dessert after every meal, including breakfast, and unlimited C's candy. And by the time she got finished talking herself through her vision, she knew that she'd be safe. She knew she'd be happy. She knew she would be well cared for and content. And all that was left for her in that was, will I miss my folks, and will my folks miss me? So that really, she came to a new and less fearful place about that. She still was worried, and but we were together for many months. So over that period of time, we were really able to talk about, we don't know, but we know it's good. How do you know it's good? Well, because most everybody feels very peaceful and joyful at the end. And there's something that is beyond human understanding that happens in that room that is just a deep transcendent peace. And because we see it over and over and over, we know that you don't really have anything to be scared of. But if you are scared, let's talk about it.
Right, yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
what happened in the end
Yeah.
for her.
Well, and you bring up some, because, you know, I've heard this so many times too in my own career, just about, you know, the worry about the loved ones left behind, you know, in terms of helping people to process that too, and what are those concerns. You know, these are things we can help people with.
Absolutely.
Well, the worry about being abandoned,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that's been a big concern for people. Can you speak more to that?
Well, I'll tell you a story about that. We had this woman many, many years ago come into the Chaplain house, and she was very much alone. She was a woman who had a difficult time getting along with people, and she was an angry person before she got ill, and then here she was vulnerable,
Sure.
which of course, you know, our coping mechanisms when we're in our health tend to become enlarged when we're not in our health. So, you know, people get scared, they you know, fight.
Sure.
They fight death, they fight people around them, and that's where she was at. So when somebody's difficult, we tend to really sort of envelop them in love. It's our job. You know, our job is to help people to have a good end-of-life experience, and we're the last ones on earth who are going to make people feel worse about the way that they're expressing themselves,
Sure.
you know, at that point. So she came in, and over a period of time, we realized that she was afraid of a couple things. She was afraid that she was going to die alone. She was afraid that she wouldn't reconcile with the children who she had been distanced from. And she really didn't see any spiritual connection. But what actually ended up happening was that she was at Chaplain House for quite a few weeks. Her family did come in, and they did it wasn't, you know, it wasn't hearts and flowers and butterflies, but they did get to say goodbye and I love you and find some sort of reconciliation with that. And she wasn't alone, because one of the things she had come to enjoy in terms of spiritual care was having Reiki volunteers. And when she actually died, she had a Reiki volunteer on each side of her, very much, you know, held in the love of humanity in this in the spiritual practice. And she died beautifully and well, and not at all afraid. And I think really at a happier and more content place than she'd been for a long time. And that's our job.
Wow, isn't that beautiful? You know, just so that people who don't know what Reiki is.
I think it's Japanese. It's and I can only put it in Christian terms because I'm Christian.
Energy
it's
work,
an energy
right?
healing or a spirit work, energy healing.
Yep.
In Christian terms, it would be similar to a laying on of hands.
Yep.
But it's a powerful thing. I know a
Yes.
ton of people who
Yeah.
can do it, and
Yes.
actually there's this warmth that's extraordinary. And
Yes, yeah.
so, you know, if people like to have that, we have volunteers who can do it. Some of the chaplains can do it. It's a complementary therapy that's available, as are, you know, massage and pet therapy and music and art.
Which I love, because again, when we're dealing, as you mentioned, the total person, spirit, mind, and body, and these alternative types of therapies are they promote well-being.
They sure do.
You know, they really tend, and they help to alleviate other symptoms. And I think that that's critical for people to understand. You know, you've brought up, again, you've used the word spirituality, talked about, you know, in terms of tending to religion. Can you please talk to the audience about what is the difference between religion and spirituality?
I will. I'm happy to. Everybody's spiritual, even if they don't articulate it in that way, because there's something inside of us that makes us ourselves. There's only ever going to be one Mary Crowe. And it's not
Should
enough.
I say, let's hope?
It's not enough for most of us, but that's the only one we have, is the one we've got. Something inside you makes you yourself. And if you've ever seen something that has died, whether it's a fly or whether it's a person, you can see that that person doesn't look sleeping, do they? They look like their essence is not there.
Yep.
So spiritual care is about taking care of the essence. And for some of us, for myself included, a big part of that is religious care. You know, it's a care that takes place within religious community, prayer, song, scripture, that sort of thing. But for others, religion has absolutely nothing to do with it. It may be, you know, feeling the wind catch a certain way when you're out sailing and you're in the zone, or reading, or playing with the dog's ears, or being with children, or, you know, gardening, dancing, singing. It can be any number of things that make you feel like you're, you know, your body and your mind, your spirit are all lined up and you're in the zone.
Yeah,
So that's spiritual care, is helping people in a moment to find that sense of, oh, I'm my most authentic self right now, and
Yeah.
this is what I need to do to nurture it.
Yeah.
So in terms of the religious piece, though, it is an important piece of what we do. We have an extraordinary diverse group of chaplains. We have 2 per diem rabbis, 1 in each location, to meet the spiritual needs of our Jewish patients who are unaffiliated. We have a full-time and a part-time Buddhist. We have a full-time Muslim. We have a Roman Catholic who's not in a religious order, but he used to be a priest. And we have a whole variety of garden variety Protestants. I don't know what you want to call them, but people like me. There are a couple people who we call right away. We always try to call Roman Catholic patients right away and Jewish patients right away, within the first 24 hours if we can. The Roman Catholics, of course, because they may have a sacramental need, and we want to make sure that that's addressed right away.
Sure.
The Jewish patients, we try to call within 24 hours because depending on whether where a Jewish patient is on the spectrum of Orthodox to very secular, they may want their rabbi involved in medical decision making because the rabbi is responsible for interpreting Jewish law. So if that's the case for that particular family, the medical team would want to ask the family for permission to speak directly to the rabbi.
Sure, yeah.
So it's just another way that we take care of the whole family.
Yep.
We don't have every religion, of course, but we do have networks within the community to meet the religious needs of all the patients.
Sure.
Wiccans, Hindus, different Asian Buddhists, all kinds. And we really take care to nurture those relationships so that if the chaplain's unable to meet the need of that person, we can say, let me help you to find the person who can help you with that. We have a wonderful connection with a Farsi-speaking imam in Boston, the Boston Center for Sufism. And he's great if we just call him up and say, none of us speak Farsi. But we do have chaplains who speak Spanish, French, Creole, Japanese, Korean, Hebrew. So we're pretty good. I mean, as far as a team, it's the
Yes.
diverse crew we've got here.
Wow, that is amazing.
But we borrow from one another, and we
Sure.
befriend the community.
Yeah.
So the religious needs can be taken care of.
Well, and again, the importance of one of the other roles, which you mentioned, is serving as that conduit or that to help network in that way, because, again, certainly you can be a complement to that as well, to that care.
We can be a complement and
Yeah.
a conduit. I don't know anything about Wiccans, but I know 2 Wiccan communities, so that's good
Yes.
enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can always just say, I don't know, but I can find out for you.
Well, and again, it's just one of the things that, again, that's so important to me in terms of hospice work is that it's always about the individual. And it's
Always.
about what are the needs and identifying those needs. Because, people deserve that.
They sure do.
To understand who that individual is, to be able to take that time. And again, it's one of the things that I just think is so valued about hospice work.
And if there is a sacrament or a ritual or a rite that a person needs to feel that sense of completion, they really need to have that.
Yeah.
In the way that's a part of their tradition.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very important that we find that and respect it. One thing people get nervous about that I just want to share with you is people get worried that we're evangelistic and that we're going to go in and try to convert people. That's never where we are.
Right.
We're all about respecting. Our driving question is, what do I need to know about you to help serve you?
Right.
It's not at all about us. So
Right.
we get sent out to patients in accordance with which team we're on, with the same nurse, the same social worker, the same medical doctor, the same hospice aides, the same, we get sent out by team, not by our own particular religious background.
Yep.
That being said, if the background is not comfortable, we always ask the Jewish patients if they'd rather have a rabbi for 2 reasons. One is that we have the rabbis and they're great, and that's fine. The other is that right away that says, we're not trying to convert you. We respect you.
Right. And as you mentioned, too, the difference between religion and spirituality, to me, like spirituality, too, it has to do with our very core beliefs, values. And again, it doesn't have anything to do with what my religious beliefs or affiliations
Absolutely
are.
true.
So again, it's all about meeting that person and who they are. So tell it, case examples, other stories that you want to share with us? You had mentioned too, again, you're talking about that you work with children. Again, a lot of times when people think of hospice, we don't even want to think that kids
No,
fall
we don't
into
wanna
this,
think about
right?
that. Yeah, it's
But
a
as we
terrible thing to
know
think
that, you know, advanced illness or end of life is not a respecter of age. So you work with children, but also, you know, I also heard you mention in terms of Alzheimer's and other, and, you know, it's really not disease specific necessarily, but it has more to do with really if somebody is, again, at end stage.
One of the things I get to do that's a really great part of my job is because I'm the clinical supervisor for the chaplains, I get to go out with each one once a year. I get to go out with one of the rabbis after we finish here. And so often when I go out with one of the chaplains who specializes in long-term care, we go to see a couple of patients who have dementia. And sometimes those experiences are so profound. I went out, well, actually, this was again Sharon, who's one of 17, but she's come up twice in this conversation. But we went, she has a beautiful voice. She's a fine musician. And the first patient we went to see was this she was like a little bird. She was just in a fetal position. And Sharon very gently sat down next to her and said, may I sit with you? May I hold your hand? May I sing you a song? And the woman was not verbal anymore, and she nodded. Well, when Sharon started to sing, this woman perked right up, and she looked at me, and she looked at Sharon, and she looked at me, and she looked at Sharon as if, it was like all her Christmases had come at once.
Yeah,
So Sharon
yeah.
was able, through her clinical skills and doing the assessment, and then through her musical ability, to be able to lift this woman into a place of just wonder.
Yeah.
The woman was in wonder. Then we went across the hall, and there was a woman who was in a wheelchair and also, again, had very advanced dementia. And she was kind of curled over into really a heap of sadness. And Sharon knelt on the floor next to her and looked up at her and said, "Can I hold your hand?" And the woman didn't respond. And so Sharon kind of very gingerly and tenderly, to make sure it was okay, reached for her hand. And she asked her if she could sing, and the woman didn't respond. And Sharon started singing. I think it was like a Taizé chant or something. It was a very simple Christian chant within the woman's tradition. And the woman looked up, and she looked at me, and she looked at Sharon, and all of a sudden, just tears, just torrents of tears.
Yeah.
And Sharon so lovingly put her hands on her head and said, "I know you have a lot on your mind, and you can't voice it, but I just want to let you know we're holding it."
Oh, isn't
It
that
was
beautiful?
exquisite,
Yeah, that's amazing.
exquisite.
Very powerful.
People who others might think couldn't respond, they responded in a very profound way
Sure, absolutely.
to that ministry. So.
We have very little time left, but I want you to be able to tell us what has impacted you most in your work in hospice care.
This is what I learned. You can take it to the bank.
Okay.
There's nothing better than ordinary. Regular is the best it gets. We are born, and it's a miracle, and we die, and it's a mystery. And in between, sometimes we go to Disney, sometimes we get married, sometimes we have a baby, sometimes we fall in love. And there are highs, and then there are terrible things. We lose people we love, we get ill, we lose our place. But most of the time, there's this vast expanse of ordinary. And when people are dying, they just want to have regular back. They want to be able to go to the bank. They want to be able to be alone if they want to be alone. They want to be able to go to the toilet themselves. Ordinary is really nice.
Yeah.
So do I have time to tell you a quick story about my neighbor?
We have a little bit
I'll
of
go
time
so
left.
fast.
You
I'll
go
go so
ahead,
fast.
please do.
I live right on the water in Gloucester.
Yeah.
And in a very Sicilian community. And one of my neighbors was dying. He'd come over from Italy when he had 5 children. He had a 6th one here. And when he needed to be taken to the Chaplain house, he had the ambulance driver take him down to the beach to touch the water. His whole life had been on the water. He'd fed his family. Generations of his family before him and fed their family. He'd come to the U.S. and brought his family. He lived on the water. Everything was about that ocean that he was never going to see again. And that is sacred ordinary.
Wow, I'll say.
Sacred ordinary.
Yeah,
So that's
beautiful.
That's what I learned.
I'll tell you, I can't thank you enough. Reverend Rona
pleasure.
Tyndall, thank you so much
Thank you
being
for
a
having
part of
me.
the show
It's
today.
good to be together.
Thank you for being a part of Timing is Everything, a show of Care Dimensions, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next show.